I am a wolf who has wandered for years, accustomed to a life of solitude. But when I was invited to join another pack by their leader, I fell into a dilemma. I was afraid of getting hurt again, but deep down, I craved a sense of belonging. When I saw the children's acceptance of me, I began to waver. Should I accept the invitation and rejoin a group? Chapter 1. For long years, I had roamed the dense, shadowy forest since leaving the pack that raised me. My once pristine white fur was now dulled and matted from constant travel through the wilderness. As the unnamed protagonist, I moved with practiced caution across the forest floor, each paw placement deliberate to minimize noise. My survival instincts, honed by years of solitude and minimal combat training, kept me vigilant. I alternated between sniffing the ground for unfamiliar scents and swiveling my ears to catch any suspicious sounds, always wary of encroaching on another pack's territory. However, my luck seemed to have run its course. In a moment of distraction, I found myself suddenly encircled by at least 6 imposing wolves, their sizes slightly surpassing my own. Their coats ranged from midnight black to earthy brown and various shades of gray, blending seamlessly with the forest-snooted palette. The pack's aggressive stance, with bared teeth and challenging snarls, sent a jolt of fear through my body. Instinctively, I dropped to the ground, pressing my belly against the cool earth. My tail curled tightly against my flank, and I lowered my head onto my paws, flattening my ears in a clear display of submission. I could feel my body trembling as I peered up at the hostile group with wide, anxious brown eyes, dreading what fate awaited me now that my peaceful existence as a rogue wolf had been shattered. Although none of the surrounding wolves exuded the commanding presence of an alpha, their unified front clearly indicated they belonged to an established pack. My mind raced, trying to discern which pack I had unwittingly stumbled upon. From among the warriors, a dark gray wolf with a distinctive black spot over his right eye emerged. This wolf, who I would come to know as the dark gray wolf, exuded an air of authority as he broke from the circle. With calculated steps, he began to circle my quivering form, fighting against my submissive posture. I cautiously turned my head to track his movement, careful not to make any sudden moves that might be perceived as a threat. The tension in the air was palpable as I awaited the pack's next move, acutely aware of how quickly my solitary existence could come to an end. Without warning, he snapped at my tail, spooking me enough where I jumped and spun around slightly to watch him as he and his packmates slightly glanced around at each other as they were obviously communicating through their pack link. After a few minutes, they seemed to have decided what to do with me, or at least received an order from a higher command, because suddenly the wolf that had been circling me began stalking towards me, as did a few of the others who were behind him, getting the message that I was to go with them. I slowly stood to my feet, keeping my head down to show I was no threat. I followed the few warriors ahead of me towards wherever they were taking me, while the rest followed behind. As we drew closer to where I was certain the pack lived in the territory, I could smell salt water. My sense of smell was proven correct once we cleared the trees and entered the clearing the pack house and other smaller homes sat. The ocean in the background behind the pack house itself. There were people outside, moving about as the group of wolves continued to herd me towards the front of the pack house. Those outside, mainly women and small children, stopped to watch as we passed. Many mothers quickly grabbed their kids, keeping them close by as they obviously didn't know if I was a threat to them or not. I would turn my head slightly, looking at some of the people I'd pass by, while keeping my head low in fear of getting attacked for seeming like a threat to the pack. As we drew nearer to the pack house, the front door to the large structure opened and out stepped an older man. I'd say about maybe close to his mid-40s or so. As we got closer, I could make out that he had shoulder-length brown hair, but at the moment that's really all I could see without seeming like I was challenging him. Once reaching the front of the house, the few warriors that were in front of me moved so there was nothing standing between me and their alpha while he glared down at me before tossing a plain white t-shirt towards me that was obviously long enough to cover everything that needed to be covered. "Shift," he commanded. His voice was deep and held authority in its tone. Imagining my human form, I felt my bones breaking and realigning in my body the way they should be for a human, and before long I was standing in front of the alpha and bactenses. Quickly reaching forwards, I grabbed the shirt he had tossed me before and slipped it over my head before pulling my long brown hair out through the neck of the shirt. Once the shirt was situated and I was sure it wouldn't cause me to flash someone accidentally, I kept my eyes to the ground and waited for him to speak to me. "What is your name, Rogue?" he said, his voice laced with anger, which I knew probably wasn't exactly directed at me. "Just all rogues in general." "Riley Black, sir," I answered quickly as I still avoided eye contact with him. "Why were you in my territory?" he asked, voice still holding the same anger to it, as I heard his pack gathering around to see what was going on. "I'm sorry," I whimpered out as I feared for my life. "I thought I was staying out of any pack's territory. I didn't mean to wander in. I was simply passing through, sir." I spared a glance around at the members of his pack as I waited for his decision as to what to do with me. Some of the older women of the pack were looking at me with pity, probably thinking I was a young girl who didn't deserve whatever their alpha was going to do to me. The sound of a clearing throat caused me to snap my attention back in front of me to the man who was about to decide my fate. Keeping my head down, I slowly lifted my brown eyes only to look at the man in front of me. My brown ones instantly locked with a pair of baby blue eyes that didn't look angry. They just looked to hold fear that he wouldn't be able to protect his pack. But there was also determination there that he would. "I have come to a decision," he said as I lowered my eyes and waited to hear my fate from him. "You will stay here for the night. But you must understand that you will be placed in a holding cell just as a precaution for my pack's safety." My head shot up as I looked at him, nodding. The sound of breaking bones surrounding me as his warriors shifted into their human forms. When I looked around, the warriors that had been surrounding me were all shirtless with either basketball shorts on or some loose-fitting jeans. Two of them walked up beside me as their alpha continued to stand there on the porch of the pack house while they grabbed a hold of my upper arms and began pulling me inside the house. I kept my eyes to the floor, figuring they wouldn't want me looking around too much if I'm not staying here longer than the night that was offered. Upon entering the basement level of the house where the cells were, I was taken to one, but not before I could see other rogues occupying some of the cells down here, and most in silver chains. After pushing me into an empty cell, the two warriors walked off while their alpha stayed behind after the cell door was closed and locked. I felt his gaze on me as I looked around the cell that would temporarily be my home for the night. I was trying not to look over at him. It felt weird to say the least after 4 years of being rogue. "Why do you do it?" his voice said into the silence, and causing me to turn my attention finally to have my brown eyes locked with his blue ones. "Sorry," I said, tilting my head to the side in complete confusion. "Why do you go rogue?" he asked before I lowered my eyes from his and looked away, turning my back on him. "Long story," I muttered out before I heard him sigh behind me. "Something I don't exactly talk about." "I'm sure you could understand that, sir." "How long were you out there?" he asked, changing the direction of the conversation from why I was to how long I was. "About 4 years, maybe," I said, looking over at him to see he wasn't standing like the big bad alpha he probably should be around rogues. I didn't really get to keep a calendar on me at all times while I was alone. "You never considered joining another pack?" he asked, cocking his head to the side curiously. "I tried to stay away from them," I said as I walked over to the bars and placed my hands on them. "Most packs don't take kindly to rogues. Figured your pack would be one of them with the way your warriors surrounded me. I am sorry that I crossed into your territory. I was trying to avoid doing something like that at all costs. You're welcome to join us, Ms. Black," he said, backing away from the cell. "I can see that you're of no real threat to the pack, and I think many others would look down upon me, either killing you like most strokes suffer or turning you back loose out there. We can talk more on it in the morning, once you've had a decent night's rest. One of my warriors will be down here with you, to keep you company, if you will." "Wait," I called after him when he headed towards the stairs. "Yes," he asked, looking back at me. "You know my name, but I don't know yours," I said as I watched a smirk grow onto his face. "You can call me Norman," he said, smiling at me before he continued on his way up their stairs, leaving me alone in his little dungeon with all the other rogues. Chapter 2. It was maybe about 30 minutes or so before another wolf walked down the stairs and over to where my cell was at the end of the small corridor in the dungeon. They send up down here to watch over rogues. One of the rogues near me called out as the boy got closer to my cell. This pack is pathetic. I was sat on the small cot in the cell with my legs pulled up to my chest and my arms around them, while still wearing just that shirt Norman had tossed out to me when I was first brought up to his pack house. I glanced over at the boy, close to my age by the looks of him, as he came to a stop in front of my cell and looked to me almost apologetically. I smiled weakly at him before turning my head and lifting my arms up to my hair and pulling it all onto one shoulder as I sat staring at my bare knees in front of me. I kept my gaze on my knees as I thought about everything that's ever happened to me to lead me to be here at this point in time. "What's your name?" I asked out in a whisper, not lifting my gaze to look at him as I'm sure he turned his attention to me as soon as I spoke up. "Matt," he said as I heard him walk closer to the cell door. "Matt Boomer." "Well, Matt Boomer," I said with the hint of a smile crossing my lips for a second before it disappeared. "Why were you chosen to be my guard?" "I'm not your guard exactly," he said. "I'm more or less your company until morning when you'll be taken up to aficionados' office." My head turned slightly and my gaze went the rest of the way before locking eyes with him. "Are they going to force me to stay with this pack?" I asked as I watched him. "Or will they allow me to leave if I so choose?" "Alpha said that is your choice to make," he said, looking at me still as I slowly turned my attention away from him and back to my knees. "But he said the offer to join is still open. Even if you decide to leave but then want to come back, he'd allow it. He says that no one deserves to be rogue if they truly don't want to be. Your Alpha really is trusting, isn't he?" I asked, glancing over with my eyes for a second before looking away. "And fast with the trusting too. Just moments before his offer he thought I was a danger to his pack. Now he's offering me a place among them. You're not like the other rogues we've come into contact with really," Matt said as I looked over at him again. "And you look like you could use some social encounters again." "After everything I went through, Matt," I whispered. "I don't think it'd fit in with a pack anymore." "Why?" he asked, and I looked away and lowered my head. I figured nothing good comes from being in one. Not for me anyway. When I glanced up after he stayed silent, I noticed the confused look on his face. Taking a deep breath, I moved my hair further out of the way and pulled down one shoulder of the large shirt to reveal what was hidden on my upper back. "Scars. Who did that to you?" he asked as I watched his expression turn to rage as his eyes went black. "My mate," I said as I pulled the shirt back over my shoulder and added back to where I had it. "And his friends before he rejected me. I was 19 when they started and I cowed and get away until I was 22. The bruises are all gone, but the scars and the memories are still there and haunt me. That is why my decision for the question your Alpha will ask me is pretty obvious. You'll go back to being a rogue and trying to steer clear of other packs. You should tell Alpha Norman," he said, and I could feel his eyes boring into my side as I continued to look away from him. "He wouldn't make you leave knowing what you've been through." "That's exactly why I won't tell him," I said, looking over at him. "It'll just be one more burden your Alpha doesn't need. I'm better off on my own anyway. I'm sorry really, but the Alpha would be furious with me if I didn't inform him," Matt said just as I glanced over at him to see his eyes glaze over as I realized what he was doing. He was contacting his Alpha through their pack, Lincoln telling him what he had just found out about me. Looking away from him, I pulled my leg closer to my chest and rested my head on the tops of my knees. I was now forced to stay here. His Alpha would be considered out of his mind if his pack found out he let a young girl who was abused leave. I no longer had a choice in whether I could leave or stay. But was I ready to live with a pack again after 4 years being Rogan, then about 4 years of being abused by my previous pack? I sat there, Matt making no move to try and talk to me after he contacted his Alpha. But it wasn't long before I heard another set of footsteps enter the dungeon. "The Alpha wants to see her," a voice said that I didn't recognize, and obviously I couldn't see the face behind the voice. Glancing towards Matt, I watched him nod to whoever had just spoken before their footsteps retreated out of the dungeon and Matt walked to the cell door and unlocked it. "Come on, really," Matt said as I looked over to him and nodded before standing cautiously to my feet, as I remember all I was wearing was this large shirt. He allowed me to exit out of the cell and head towards the stairs that exited the dungeon before he followed behind me, keeping quiet. I was beginning to think maybe he thought I was mad at him for telling his alpha about me, but I wasn't. I understood he had to, and I would never hold that against him. The walk through the pack house and up even more stairs to the floor the office was on was quiet, and I could feel members of the pack with their gazes on me. It was an uncomfortable feeling to say the least, but I was going to show how uncomfortable it made me. Most of these wolves still didn't like that I was dead yet, like most rogues other than the few down in the dungeon, but I think those were held for questioning and would be disposed of as soon as their usefulness disappeared. My wolf was howling at me to raise my head high and stop looking weak to the pack, but my for years as a rogue with no skills whatsoever turned me into a submissive wolf that didn't want trouble. My wolf would have been Luna, and she didn't like the glares that she was receiving from the pack as we passed through the main open floor of the ground level before heading up the stairs. It took all my willpower not to allow her to surface and attempt to place them all in their place when we weren't even a part of the pack to begin with. I followed quietly behind Matt, trying not to lose sight of him and be left alone with a pack that still didn't like me because I was a rogue. My bare feet made the most noise as we walked down the silent hallway, once reaching the floor the office was on. "Matt, I hope you don't think I'm mad with you," I said as we continued to walk, him slowing his pace when I spoke up. "If you are, you have every right to be," he said, lowering his head but still refusing to look at me. "I'm not," I said, grabbing his arm gently and stopping him so he'd turn and finally look at me. "You did what you felt you had to, because if you hadn't, I certainly wouldn't have. I was planning on leaving and not telling a soul what I went through. But now you're about to be forced to stay in a pack," he said, shaking his head. "I would have eventually joined a pack again if I felt safe enough to do so. I don't see your alpha laying a hand on me to harm me. Do you?" He looked at me and quickly shook his head while I smiled. "He'd never lay a hand to hurt anyone who was in his pack," he said with confidence. "Exactly," I said, smiling. "So it would probably be for the best that I joined a pack like this one instead of one that would bring even more harm to me." He beamed at me before looking ahead of us, causing me to follow his gaze until I spotted the large set of double doors at the end of the hallway. "That's his office," he said as he glanced back down at me. "HS expecting you." I looked back over at him and watched as he turned and headed back down the stairs, leaving me alone in the silent hallway. Taking a deep breath, I looked back to the double doors before slowly making my way to them. I could easily smell him on the other side of the doors, the scent strong as he must pen inside the room. That was the job of the alpha, spending all his time working over things that related to the safety and well-being of his pack. And had I become Luna in my last pack, it would have been my job to help out in every way I could and any way possible. I could feel my wolf whimper at the memory of our mate rejecting us, but I had accepted that the day he started beating me like I was a punching bag, shaking my head to clear my thoughts about the past that was never going to change. I took another deep breath before I raised my hand to knock on the set of doors in front of me. I didn't have to wait long before I heard his voice from the other side of the door. "Come on in, Ms. Black," he called out as I looked down to the handles of the doors before me, gripping one firmly. I pushed the door open and peered into the office, instantly being greeted with his now strangely familiar scent in just under a day. When I looked up, I was met with his deep baby blue eyes that seemed to be searching my soul at that very instant. "I'm glad you could make it up," he said, and stood behind his desk before motioning to a chair in front of him. "We have some things to discuss this morning, Ms. Black." Chapter 3. I took a seat across from Norman, his work desk seated between us, as I pulled the shirt down over my knees as far as I could so that I didn't accidentally flash him. "It has come to my attention that there is something you have been keeping from me in regards to your past with your old pack." He started once he sat down in his chair behind the desk. "Now I understand that it is painful for you to talk about, really. But after what Matt told me, I can't just let you leave and live back out there in that world when you've already had to deal with enough pain. Please accept my offer to join the pack. Because of my past, it makes it hard for me to be able to live happily in a pack alpha," I said as I kept my voice steady and low to show the respect he deserved. "I told you, really," he said, Call me Norman. I've been without a pack for 4 years, I said, and I don't think your pack would openly accept a rogue such as me who is damaged. On the contrary, he said, looking at me as he rested his elbows on his desk and placed his chin on his hands. I've had many come to me ever since your arrival asking if I was going to kill you or force you back out of the territory. Many of them don't want hither alternative. They want you to live here among us because they neither seen or sense any threat from you. Just a kind soul, who needs a second chance at being able to be a part of a loving pack. I looked down at my hands that I had placed in my lap, looking away from his intense blue eyes that seemed to wander deep into my soul just from one look. Riley, I will not force you, he said after a few minutes when I made no move to speak up. But I would highly suggest you take my offer. I know of many packs out there who do not give rogues second chances at being in a pack. I looked away from him as I knew what my answer would be. I had all but told Matt out there in the hall that I would accept his alpha's offer. I just didn't know how to tell him. I guess when I moved my head, some of my hair didn't fall over my shoulder and exposed the back of my neck, because a few seconds later, he was out of his seat and walking around his desk towards me. May I see, really? He asked with a cautious voice as I looked up at him to see he had what appeared to be sadness and almost pain in his eyes at finally seeing the scars just visible above the collar of the shirt. Nodding, I lifted my hands up and pulled my hair the rest of the way over my other shoulder before gently tugging the collar of the shirt down over my shoulder some to expose more of the scars. I looked up at him with my eyes as I tilted my head to the side slightly. I lowered my gaze when I noticed his left hand reaching out cautiously to the collar of the shirt. I turned my head a little more to the side before closing my eyes just as fingers brushed the skin just above the collar of my shirt. As his fingers continued to lightly graze over some of the slightly raised scars, I kept my eyes closed and took a deep breath before I spoke up. I accept your offer to stay and join your pack, Alpha Norman. I whispered out and only opened my eyes when his hand stilled on my shoulder. I lifted my brown eyes to have them lock with his blue ones as he seemed to slowly process what it was that I had said just seconds ago. I watched as a small smile graced his lips before his eyes glazed over just as Matt's had we contacted his alpha through the mind link. He had removed his hand from my shoulder, and when he was finished contacting whoever, he walked back behind his desk and sat down while leaving me there to figure out what to do now. Before I could figure anything out, there was a knock at the closed door behind me. Come in, he answered just as the door opened to reveal a woman a few years younger than me. You called for me, she asked, looking from Norman then down to me where I still sat. Riley, this is my younger cousin, Jenna, Norman said, drawing my attention away from the new face. You met her mate last night. Matt. Jenna, I want you to take Riley here and help her get some clothes and pick out a room here in the pack house. Of course, she said, smiling at Norman before looking to me again. Come on, Riley, let's get you something to wear other than that shirt my dorky cousin decided to toss at you yesterday afternoon. I heard that, Jenna. I heard Norman playfully growl out behind me as I stood up, so cautious that I didn't flash him. That was the point. Jenna said, laughing as she pushed me out of the office and closed the door before something else could happen between her and her cousin. I looked back at her as I raised one eyebrow at her and a small smile on my face when she turned to face me. Sorry, I always tease him like that, she said, smiling as she came to stand beside me. Ever since his mate and wife died a few years ago in a rollback, I do any and everything I can to cheer him up and keep him from stressing himself out too much. I'm sorry to hear about the Pax Luna, I muttered softly as I lowered my head some. We're getting by, but our Luna didn't give him an heir to the pack, she said, still standing in the same place. They were trying, but she didn't manage to get pregnant before she was killed, and he doesn't believe in those second chance mates, so HES never really moved on from her. I looked down at my feet. Everyone who believed in it found their second chance mates, but if you didn't believe and continued to hold on to the pain from the loss of your mate, you'd never find that mate. Hey, do you mind if we stop somewhere before we get you some clothes? She asked after a few seconds, causing me to lift my head up. Of course not, I said, shaking my head as she smiled and grabbed my wrist before pulling me out of the pack house and leading me down the path into all these houses that the pack lived in. Come on, follow me, she said, smiling as she glanced back before running up the steps to one of the houses and through the front door, where I instantly stopped. not sure if I should follow her inside. I looked around outside, feeling like everyone was watching and judging as I stood there on the porch in nothing more than a shirt before I heard footsteps come back to the door. "Riley, come on, it's okay," she said, smiling as she grabbed my wrist and pulled me over the threshold of the house. "Mama, where are you?" "In the kitchen, Jenna." I heard a female voice call out as Jenna smiled back at me and pulled me into the kitchen with her, where an older woman was standing with her back to us. The kitchen smelled so homey just with her there cooking. Everything homemade. "Oh, who's this?" the woman said after turning around to spot the two of us in the doorway, and I immediately felt awkward because of how I was dressed. "This is really," Jenna said, smiling over at me as her mother looked to me and smiled as well. "Just the rogue that was brought in late yesterday evening. Now where is he?" I think she was talking to herself because before anyone could answer, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone to stand there awkwardly. I kept my head down, my hair resting over my shoulders as I waited for Jenna to come back. Her mother turned back to what she was doing before we walked in and just left me to stand there. "Here we are," I heard Jenna's voice say as she came walking back into the room, causing me to lift my head up to look and see she had a little boy in her arms. I smiled at the baby in her arms as his little brown eyes locked on me. "Meet Layton," she said, smiling down lovingly at the baby. "Mine and Matt's baby boy." Mama was babysitting him while I went to see what exactly Norman needed from me. "Is adorable," I said, smiling at the baby, then looking up at Jenna. "How old is he?" "About 6 months," she said, smiling up at me before looking at what I was wearing. "Some of my old clothes are still here. Let's see what we can find to put on you until we can get you your own clothing to wear. Shall we?" I nodded and she turned to lead the way up the stairs to where I'm guessing her old room was when she lived here with her parents. "Okay, so some of my things will probably be a little big on you, but they're only temporary anyway," she said as she opened a door and walked inside with me right on her heels as she walked over to her closet. I watched as she dug through her closet with Layton on her hip, who was watching me intently, having never seen me before. He was quite curious. "Here we go," she said, pulling out a couple things. She pulled out another oversized shirt and some jogging pants before laying them down on the bed. "I'll leave you to get changed," she said, turning to face me. "Just come back downstairs when you're done, then we can head out to get some shopping done before taking you back to the pack house to pick out your room." "Thanks," I said as she nodded and left, closing the door behind her before I turned back to the clothing on her bed. I couldn't understand how these people were so kind to someone they've never met before today. Pushing the thought from my head, I walked over to the bed and looked down at the things she laid out for me. Pulling off the shirt I was wearing, I noticed a mirror over on the other side of the room. Before pulling the new clothes on, I made my way over to the mirror and turned my back to it, lifting up my hair to look at the healed scars that litter a good portion of my back. Each one was a pain-filled memory of what I last remembered of pack life. I went rogue when I had finally had enough of the abuse, all of the pain they caused me. Dropping my hair back down and turning away from the mirror, I wiped away the forming tears from my eyes and walked back over to the side of the bed that held the clean clothing on. I had made a promise to myself that night for years ago that I'd never join another pack, and now here I was, doing just that. But I wouldn't have done this if I didn't feel like I could trust them when they all seemed to trust me. Now I just have to hope I didn't make a mistake by agreeing so easily to stay. Chapter 4. It's been about a week since I joined Norman's pack. I picked out my room at his pack house that same day after Jenna, and I got me a change of clothes and went shopping for new ones. My room I picked out was on the main floor of the pack house towards the back. It had cream-colored walls and off-white colored carpet, along with a twin-size bed in the back left corner that ran along the back wall from the door entering the room itself. I didn't have any belongings really other than the clothes I bought with Jenna, so my walls and bedside table are both bare, with nothing to show my life history from before my years as a rogue. Most of the pack has seemed to welcome me in with open arms as well, though I think that originally found me are still a little cautious about me, which I can completely understand. I've mostly been left to myself since joining the pack, although Jen and Matt come visit me in my room most days with their little bundle named Layton. I was just sitting in my room, on my bed with a couple books I had been given a few days ago, when in walked Jenna. Yeah, sure, come on in, I said sarcastically as I glared at her. Don't even worry about knocking. Okay, I'll remember that, she said with a smirk while my glare grew. Come on, you're helping me with the kids today. What? I said as she pulled the book I had been reading out of my hand and grabbed my wrist to pull me off my bed. Because Norman thinks you're spending too much time in your room, she said, pulling me out the door and down the hallways. And I agree. You need to get out more. Meet the pack. Jenna. I groaned out as she pulled me out of the pack house and towards where some of Vak's kids were playing around, waiting for Jenna and now apparently me to arrive. I looked around at all the kids as we came to a stop and their attention turned to us. Most of the kids were young, between 3 years and 8 years of age, but there were some who were older. I spotted a 13-year-old girl holding Leighton in her arms as they surrounded us. Jenna? A small blonde-haired, green-eyed girl said, running up to Jenna and myself with a smile on her face as she jumped into Jenna's arms. Hi there, Abigail, Jenna said, smiling at the girl before they both looked to me. This is my friend, really. Hi, Ms. Riley, Abigail said, smiling warmly at me, which I couldn't help but return. Hi, Abigail, I said, smiling and kneeling down as Jenna set her on her own 2 feet. And how old are you? 5, she said brightly as she held up 5 fingers on her hand to show me. You're a big girl then, aren't you, Abigail? I said, smiling warmly at her as she beamed up at me and nodded. There's my cute little baby, Jen echoed as she took Leighton from the 13-year-old girl who had been holding him. I watched with the smallest pang of jealousy as Jenna held her son close to her and nuzzled her face to him. Ms. Really? Abigail asked, tugging on my hand to grab my attention. Yes, Abigail, I asked, smiling down at her. What does your wolf look like? She asked sweetly as her big green eyes looked up at me with complete innocence in them. She's big and white, I said, smiling down at the girl. And I've even told her eyes are brown just like my own are. Can we see her? A little boy with brown hair asked, walking up to stand beside Abigail in front of me. Unsure. I looked over to Jenna to see if it was all right. I wasn't sure about how things went in this pack, and I also wasn't sure if any of the mothers of these kids would appreciate a former rogue being in their wolf from around their kids. It'll be fine, really, Jenna said, smiling. You can go behind that tree and shift. Nodding, I stood up from the 2 small children in front of me and walked over to where the trees were and quickly stripped down before shifting into my white wolf. Grabbing my clothes in my muzzle, I quickly made my way back out to where the kids were. I instantly heard giggles coming from the younger ones as I placed my clothes next to Jenna before turning my attention to them all. My wolf was singing with joy as I laid down on my belly, and the children all began running over to me before climbing on every part of me that they could reach. My tail was wagging slightly behind me as I looked around at all the young children surrounding me. I looked to my left just as Abigail came walking around my face, smiling. You're beautiful, beamed at me as she patted my snout. My tail wagged more before I felt something clamp down around it, causing me to turn my head sharply and look back to see that little boy who had asked to see my wolf had decided he wanted to play with my tail. Looking back to Jenna, she started laughing at the sight of me covered in children, all happy that I was there for them to play on. Back at my old pack, before everything that happened with me finding my mate and being rejected, I had always loved being around the kids and keeping them happy. My wolf was humming with happiness from being accepted into a pack once again. Even though I had been rogue for so long, it felt nice to be among others, and I had to take Jenna and Norman most of all for it. Okay, children, Jenna said after a while, still smiling down at where I lay. Let's let Ms. Riley get up and shift back to her human self. There was a chorus of AWS as they one by one climbed off of me, allowing me to finally stand and make my way with my clothes to the tree, where I shifted back and placed my clothes back on my body. We stayed with the children for a little while longer after I shifted before we slowly headed back up to the pack house. Thanks for that, I said to Jenna as we walked up the grassy path. I think I really needed that. It was no problem, she said, smiling widely as I glanced up and caught sight of Norman standing in one of the windows staring down at Jenna, Leighton, and myself as we walked. Glancing over at Jenna, I could tell she was having a conversation with someone through the mind, like as her eyes seemed to glaze over and stare off ahead while not really seeing anything. "Hey, really?" Jenna said after a few minutes when we were nearing the door to the pack house. "Your mate from your old pack. What was his title?" "He was an alpha," I said, looking down to my feet as I tried hard to keep the hurt I felt and the betrayal I felt when he along with his friends abused me before I got away. Glancing over at Jenna, she didn't say anything else before excusing herself, saying she needed to get home and put Leighton down for his nap and start supper for her and Matt. Nodding, I smiled weakly and waved to her before I walked in through the front door of the pack house and slowly made my way to the hall that led to my room. "Riley?" a voice said from the stairs as I was walking past them. Looking up, I spotted Norman standing at the top looking down at me. "Yes, Alpha?" I asked, looking up to him as I wondered what he needed. "Could I speak to you in my office for a moment, please?" he asked as I nodded and made my way up the stairs before following him to his office. I was sure if maybe I was in trouble for shifting around the kids earlier when Jenna said it would be okay. "Don't look so tense, really," he said, smiling back at me as we entered his office and I went to the seat I had sat in the day he offered me a place in his pack. "Why did you want to speak with me?" I asked nervously. "You're not in trouble, so please relax," he said as he sat down on the other side of the desk in his office. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Okay?" I asked, looking at him confused. I hadn't been in this pack barely a week and he wanted to talk to me about something. "I don't know if you realize the reason behind it, but I asked Jenna to ask you the title of your former mate had you not been rejected by him." Norman started off casually and almost cautiously. "Why?" I asked as I tilted my head to the side. "I know my cousin told you about the pack losing its Luna," he said as I watched him. "So I'm sure you are aware that I have run this pack without a Luna for a few years now. But it's getting to a point where the pack needs a Luna, so it is becoming severely unstable. Why are you telling me all of this?" I asked, confused as I watched him sigh before running his hand through his hair. "Riley, your title," he said, looking at me, "had you not been rejected, would have been Luna in your former pack. There aren't any other females among my pack that are made for the role of Luna in a pack. You are. It's who you were meant to be, and you know that. Since the start of our kind, there have only been a small handful of accounts where an alpha appointed the role of Luna to a female that wasn't his mate." "I don't understand," I said, shaking my head in confusion as I looked to him. "Riley, I would like for you to help me run this pack," he said. "To be my Luna, for all intents and purposes." I stared at him in shock. He wanted me, a former rogue, to help him run his pack. I don't care what my title would have been had I not been rejected. When his pack caught wind of him asking me to be his Luna of the pack, they'd turn against him. "Your E-pack would never accept me as their Luna," I said, shaking my head. "I've only been here for a week. Even still, some don't seem to like me as is. Your E-pack would turn against you the second you announce this to them all." "I don't think they would," he said, looking at me as he rested his elbows on his desk and folded his hands together as he watched me. "They all know I'm in need of a Luna or this pack will fall. Also a majority of them that have met you already sense the Luna in you. It's what you were meant to do. Just think about it, really. You're not required to give me an answer yet, but I do hope you'll think about it." I nodded and stood to my feet once he said I was allowed to leave, allowing me to go and be left to my thoughts about the new offer he had left with me. Chapter 5. He offered you that? Jen asked later that night, sitting in my room with me in the pack house after I had just told her what her cousin offered me hours before. "I don't care what my title would been, Jenna," I said, looking up at her as I sat on my bed. "His pack would turn against him. I'm a former rogue who he would love killed otherwise, but he let me wed and let me join. They won't accept me to be their Luna if I were to accept his offer." "Riley, think about it for a minute," Jenna said, walking over and kneeling in front of me where I sat as she took a hold of my hands. "You look hard enough, you can see that it's crumbling around the edges. I trust my cousin, and I know he wouldn't offer something as big as this if he didn't think it was for the good of the pack. Then I don't want his pack to hate him," I said, pulling my arms from her and standing up as I walked away from her with my back facing her. Your wolf wants you to accept it. Jenna asked after a few moments of silence. It was true. After Norman's offer, my wolf has been trying to get me to accept the offer to be Luna. Yeah, I whispered, not turning around to face her as I wrapped my arms around myself. Your e-wolf wants you to take your rightful place as Luna, she whispered, walking over to me. I can sense the Luna in you. Matt can too. Hell, even those kids today could. Why do you think they were so comfortable around you when you shifted into your wolf? It's who you are really, so you need to think about it. I kept my back to her as I felt her presence begin to leave the room before she stopped and spoke again. You told me when you first arrived that you didn't know your place in this pack. She said, maybe your place is by my cousin's side as the Luna. She didn't say another word as she exited out of my room and closed my door behind her. That was also true. On the first day I was here, when Jenna and I went to get me some clothes, I confided in her as I told her that because I hadn't been with a pack so long, I didn't know where my place would be to fit in here. I could almost feel my wolf nudging me to accept the offer. I know she wanted me too, but I couldn't just do that to Norman. I'd never forgive myself if his pack turned against him for giving the role of Luna to a rogue. Deciding that I needed to go for a run to clear my head, I got changed into a tank top and loose shorts before making my way out of my room and then out of the pack house itself. Going to the edge of the woods, I looked around to make sure no one was watching me before I stripped out of my shorts and tank so I could shift without ripping my clothes to shreds. Once shifted into my white wolf, I left my clothes behind a tree and took off at a run around the pack's territory and just enjoyed the feeling of being free. I lost track of time as I was running before coming across a scent that didn't belong to those of the pack. It smelled of blood and death. Turning my head quickly in the direction it seemed to be going, I realized it was heading straight for the center of the territory, where the pack house and the homes of the members of the pack were located. Just from the scent alone, I could tell it was more than one rogue. Way more, letting out a warning howl for the rest of the pack, knowing they'd hear it even if they were asleep. I quickly made my way following the scent that was leading me back. When I reached the edge of the woods, the sight before me had my wolf whimpering. Members of the pack were all fighting with the rogues, more than I figured there had been when I came across the trail. I hadn't had a chance to learn to fight. Norman had made plans for me to learn with Matt later on, but now was when I needed the knowledge most. Looking around panicked, not knowing what to do to help the pack out, I noticed that most of the children seemed to be hidden somewhere safe, as were some of the women. The only wolves really out fighting were the warriors and of course Norman. My wolf whimpered more when we spotted a tiny figure lying on the ground crying in the middle of all the fighting. It was when she looked up that I realized who it was. It was Abigail, and there was a black wolf with matted and blood-stained fur stalking its way towards her. Feeling my ears flatten on the back of my head and the hair on my neck stand straight up, I felt my wolf push me forwards and out of the woods with the sound of a vicious snarl leaving my lips as I bolted to them to place myself between Abigail and the threat. Grabbing the wolf by the back of its neck and tossing it aside and away from Abigail, I quickly moved to place myself over her to keep her safe. I had my paws spread completely out to keep me balanced and my head was low. I felt my lips pull back over my canines as a growl erupted from my chest, showing I meant business. The rogue stood and shook his head, glancing back to me as my wolf took over completely. All that mattered was keeping this child safe. I'd risk my life before I'd let someone so young die at the hands of a rogue. As the rogue turned to fully face me and the girl once again, I felt another growl erupt from my chest as he stalked forwards, thinking he'd have a shot at getting to the girl behind me. I kept my eyes trained on the wolf in front of me. I may not have been trained, but I did know that much. Don't give them an opening to attack you. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rising more as this wolf continued to edge closer, threatening the life of the child behind me. Finally, when he thought I was least expecting it, the wolf lunged towards me and Abigail, but was only met by my wolf in the air, tumbling to the ground. The sounds of our snarls and growls could be heard as we bit and clawed at our opponent, trying to get the upper hand. I was able to get a couple of bites in on the wolf I was fighting, the taste of their irony blood in my mouth proving that. But it wasn't enough to subdue the threat before he managed to kick me off himself and pin me to the ground. In that second, I felt his teeth plunge into my shoulder, causing me to let out a howl of pain as he bit down harder. I managed to move around enough to get my feet under him just right before I kicked him off of me. I got back to my feet, favoring my right shoulder as I stood there, a shoulder he had bitten into. I could feel the blood pouring from the wound, my blood staining my white fur as my wolf whimpered out at the pain the injury was causing. Turning my head to look back at Abigail temporarily to make sure she was okay, I looked back when I heard the sound of movement from in front of me. I didn't have a chance to prepare for his attack this time like before. He went straight for my wounded shoulder and bit down hard on it once again. My leg gave out on me when he pulled away. I fell to the ground before he stood over me and snarled in victory. Although the wound didn't seem all that bad, I seemed to be losing too much blood as my vision began to blur and my head became dizzy. Just barely. I watched another black wolf leap over my fallen body and stand in front of me, pushing the rogue back away from me before standing in a defensive stance in front of me. This black wolf, larger than the rogue, was a member of the pack, and more importantly I could sense that it was Norman. I had never seen his wolf until that moment, and I was wishing that I waltzed on the verge of losing consciousness so that I could admire his wolf like I wanted to. My wolf whimpered out again from the pain in my shoulder as I watched Norman attack the rogue, successfully killing him just as I heard Dallas' voice. "Ms. Riley?" she called out before I felt her wrap her small arms around my large neck, the sounds of sobbing coming from her as Norman slowly turned around to face me. The last thing I saw before unconsciousness took over was worry clear in his blue eyes. When I came to again, I was in a pale white room that smelled of disinfectants with the annoying sound of a heart monitor. Groaning, I closed my eyes tightly from the blinding bright light that was in the room and reflecting off the walls, my head turning to the side in the process. Came a voice. "Really, can you hear me?" Slowly, I opened my eyes again, allowing them to adjust to the brightness of the room before looking around for the face that matched the voice. There were 3 people in the room with me, and Jenna was the one who had spoken. But my eyes went from her face to Norman's, where he stood against the wall with that same worried look in his eyes. "Thank God you're all right," I heard Jenna say before I felt her gently wrap her arms around me in a hug, careful of my now bandaged shoulder. "I don't think I was going to die from a bite on the shoulder, Jenna," I said, laughing lightly, trying to lighten the mood. She pulled back and gave me a playful glare while I just merely smiled innocently at her. "Don't ever scare me like that again, really," she said, grabbing my hand as she looked up to Matt beside her. I smiled at the 2 of them, happy they had found each other and neither had been rejected by a mate that was supposed to love and care for the rest of their life. "Matt," Norman said from where he stood near the wall, "would you and Jenna give me a few minutes to talk with Ms. Black? Besides you to have a baby you need to be getting home to." "Okay, Norman," Jenna said before looking back to me and squeezing my hand. "They'll come back and see you soon, really." Nodding, I watched as she and Matt left the room before my attention turned to Norman by the wall once more. I watched and waited for him to say something, but he remained quiet a little longer before he finally spoke up. "Are you all right, really?" he asked quietly. "It's just a bite on the shoulder," I said, looking down at my shoulder as I placed my hand on the wound gently. "It'll heal in no time." "Have you put any thought into the question I asked you in my office?" he asked after a couple minutes of silence. "I have," I said, nodding and looking down as I thought about how I'd answer him. "And what is your decision?" he asked as I looked back up to him, locking my brown eyes with his blue ones. "My wolf took over when that rogue was going for Abigail," I said, looking down again. "No matter what pack she's a part of, because she would leave in Aluna. She's protective over every wolf in the pack she's in. So in reality, I have no choice really on my decision. It's like it was already made for me the day I was born. I accept your offer to be your pack's Luna." Alpha Norman. Chapter 6. I watched as he stared at me in silence, maybe not sure I had really told him that, but I meant it. My wolf would forever be protective over any and every wolf that was in that pack. Snapping out of my thoughts, I looked back to Norman to see he was still staring at me. Stunned, it looked like. "Are you all right, Alpha?" I asked, smiling at him as he shook his head before actually looking at me again. "I'm fine, really," he said, smiling at me where I lay on the hospital bed. You made a wise decision. I hope you're right. I mumbled as I looked away. I still would hate myself if his pack turned against him for me doing this. Accepting his offer like I just did. Riley, he said, causing me to look back up at him. Most of the pack saw your actions today with protecting young Abigail from that rouge. They'll accept you because they know your intentions with becoming Luna would be to protect the pack. You don't have to worry about them leaving or turning against me for this. I just really hope you're right, Alpha, I said, looking up into his blue eyes as he smiled down at me. I am, he said. Now get some rest. I'll send Jenna in here to take you shopping when your shoulder completely heals so that you can go out and get a dress. A dress? I asked, looking at him as he stood to his feet. For what? I have to announce you to the pack officially as the new Luna, he said, looking at me from over by the door where he had walked to while he was talking. It's a formal event. I'm sure you're familiar with stuff like that from your old pack, Ms. Black. Jenna will help you find something to wear. He looked at me a moment longer before he turned and walked out of the room I was sitting in, leaving me to my thoughts. He was going to officially announce me as the new Luna to the pack, as soon as my shoulder was healed enough so that I could leave this room. It was strange they wanted to keep me in here until it was healed. I guess so I didn't move it wrong in the short amount of time it took to heal. The pack doctor came in about an hour later, telling me I should be good to leave by tomorrow morning, and until then I should just rest and relax. I was lying back on the bed, my eyes closed as I tried to fall asleep, when I heard a knock on my door. Yes, I called out as I lifted my head up to see two figures standing in the door. Someone wanted me to bring her by, Jenna said, her head popping in with a smaller head in front of her. Hey, Abigail, I said, smiling at the child in front of her as the girl's smile widened and when I said hello to her. Ms. Really? Are you okay? She asked, looking up at me after running over to the side of my bed. Yes, sweetie, I'm fine, I said, smiling down at the child. You'll be better in no time. That mean old wolf will need to do better than just bite me on the shoulder. She smiled widely up at me as I turned my attention over to Jenna, who was now standing behind her. She just had to come and see you before I could put her to bed, Jenna said, placing her hand on top of Abigail's head. She wanted to thank you for earlier today. I turned my attention back to the small child as she smiled shyly at me now. Thank you for protecting me, Ms. Riley, she said as she placed her hands behind her back. You're very welcome, Abigail, I said. It's my job as an adult to help protect all the younger wolves in the pack. Speaking of your job, Jenna said, drawing my attention to her. I'm going to take Abigail here back to her room and put her to bed, then I'm coming here to have a word with you. Knowing exactly why she wanted to talk to me, I just nodded and waved as she led the girl out of the room before closing the door behind her. I laid my head back on the pillow again and just closed my eyes, waiting for when Jenna would come back after putting Abigail to bed so she could question me about what I know Norman told her. I knew she'd be happy though. She wanted me to accept Norman's offer to be the pack's Luna, so I didn't have to worry about her biting my head off and calling me stupid for my decision. It wasn't long before I heard a knock at my door again. I knew it was Jenna this time, and she didn't wait for me to allow her entrance into the room before she opened the door and walked on in. So, she said as I peeked when I opened to look at her as she smiled. My cousin the Alpha told me that I'm to take you to find a dress to wear when you get out of here tomorrow. Now why would that be really? Why do you think, Jenna? I said, smiling widely at her as her own smile turned into a full-blown grin. You accepted his offer, didn't you? She asked. That would be why he wants me to take you out to get a special dress for this upcoming ceremony, isn't it? Yeah, I said, nodding and smiling. I won't officially become Luna until the ceremony, so I have a few days to rest up and prepare for it. You nervous about becoming Luna? She asked as she sat down on the edge of my bed and smiled at me. Is it that obvious? I asked as I peered up at her. No, not really, she said, shaking her head. But you'd be a fool if you weren't the least bit nervous about it. Even if you were truly my cousin's maid and just becoming Luna, you'd still have the right to be nervous. Why'd doesn't your cousin believe in second chance mates? I asked as I looked down to my hands resting on my lap. I think, she said after taking a moment. He feels that if there was such a thing as a second chance mate, he would have found her shortly after losing his mate and wife. But even then they say those don't show up that often. And from what I heard, the only way you can find them is if both sides have moved on from the loss or rejection of a mate they were originally supposed to be with. He hasn't moved on from her death, has he? I asked, looking up at her with sad eyes as she shook her head. He just can't let her go, she said sadly. She was the love of his life, and they so desperately wanted to start a family as soon as they were married. They tried so hard. The whole pack knew they were, but they just never managed to conceive before she was taken from us. Dinner, I said after a few minutes, if it's okay with you. Tomorrow before we go look for me a dress, I'd like to visit the Luna's grave and pay my respects to her. I don't see what the harm of that could be, she said, smiling at me. I think the pack would appreciate that you did that. Now get some rest in the morning so we can go. Bye, Jenna, I said, smiling and waving as she stood and left the room, leaving me alone once again and hopefully for the rest of the night so I could rest and wrap my mind around me becoming the new Luna of this pack.